The DNC made that impossible for us. They have banned us, shadow banned us, kept us off stages, manipulated polls, used lawfare against us, sued us in every possible state. They've even planted insiders into our campaign to disrupt it and to create actual legal issues for us. I mean, the extent by which the sabotage they've unleashed upon us, it's mind-blowing. I mean, we're still learning new ways that they have sabotaged us. I really wanted a fair shot at this election, and I believed in the America that I, a little girl, pledged an allegiance to.
All right, you said that we need a plan. What's your guys' plan if you get into office?
First and foremost, we need to reduce spending. Then we've got to audit our agency spending, our priorities, and we've got to be intelligent about how the government thinks about its role in the lives of everyday citizens. We've got to figure out how to stimulate the economy and increase productivity. You know, I've heard you talk very positively about Bitcoin and AI and innovation in general. But, you know, the Inflation Reduction Act was supposed to add to stimulus in the economy. CHIPS Act was supposed to add to stimulus in the economy. Neither one has actually done that. Both have resulted in inflation due to such massive amounts of spend. So there's, you know, we have this agency called the Government Accountability Office, who is designed to track and audit this stuff, but they've never been properly looked at or empowered to produce the kind of reports that are honest. I'd imagine that if we put in, you know, real auditors into the government, we'd see some pretty scathing reports about abuses of budgets. There's, you know, let's just talk about military spending alone. We spend an enormous amount compared to any other nation on military, and these security agreements are, you know, if they actually produce security for the country, it'd be one thing, but right now they seem to be antagonizing our enemies. So reduction of military spending is really, really key. The next big budget item is healthcare. And we have too many sick people in this country. We spend $4.6 trillion on healthcare. It's not producing the results we need. So we need to be reassessing how to get our kids and our families healthy, because it is bankrupting the country. That's why when I talk about chronic health, it's not this woo-woo concept. It's really like tangible in terms of our country's priorities. And if you're a single issue voter who cares about the economy, we need to fix how much the government is spending on healthcare, and we need healthy people who are productive.
Okay, so long term, I get it. Get people healthy, fix the soil. That's going to bring down those costs dramatically. But in the like immediate, call it 100 days, do you guys have a thing you're going to go after to reduce spending?
The military budget on day one is really a priority. And then the second is agency conflicts. Many of our agencies have massive leadership issues as it relates to contracts that are between the government and these private corporations. When we talk about corporate capture, that's what we're talking about, is that the people running our agencies are the same people that are benefiting from those positions by moving government dollars into corporate coffers. And we need to audit every single one of our agencies starting on day one. It's not going to be an easy task, but it is a task of utmost priority.
And what do you guys think about the amount of regulation that we have now? Good, bad, indifferent?
It's interesting because, you know, Citizens United, the Chevron deference was just overturned by the Supreme Court recently. And basically what the Supreme Court said was that we're not going to defer to the agencies on certain things anymore. We're still going to allow the courts to go through a regular judicial process on issues related to those things, such as, you know, what the EPA regulates, and we're not going to defer to the agencies to make ultimate calls anymore. And I actually think that was a good thing, because if the agencies were doing what they should be doing, we would want Chevron deference, which is deference to the agency to oversee and implement a order. But the agencies have been gutted by corporate capture. And I think returning to regular judicial process, you know, related to an oil spill or related to river contamination is a good thing. And I would say overall, I mean, is there a piece of regulation that you're particularly following? Regulation around Bitcoin or?
Yeah, crypto is the one, obviously, that's most on my mind. But I just have a generalized thesis that we are facing a Cold War with China. And if we are going to dial up rhetoric and get into a hot war with China, I would say that's really stupid. And if we want to win an economic war, the way to do that is, I mean, the 20th century gives us a playbook, and the playbook looks something like dramatically reduce regulations to make business just easier, and dramatically reduce taxes so that businesses are able to reinvest into their businesses. And that's so hot button now. I know people are going to hear that and be like, yeah, this is a business guy just talking his book. But just look at what we did historically when we were in the Cold War with Russia. That is the playbook. And so as you increase regulations, business just gets harder to do. This is why we haven't been able to build the railway here in California. It's just one restriction after another. It is a literally like 15,000 page book on how not to get things done. So yeah, you're going to reduce.
If regulation made sense and it was economical from even the government operation of these regulatory bodies, that wouldn't be a problem. But massive inefficiency and corruption within our regulatory bodies is why we are here today. Regulators being able to control corporations is just another way for them to have power in times of elections. It's just another tool that politicians use to maintain the control of political financial coffers. So there's a few ways to go about this. One is, I mentioned Citizens United in the incorrect context, but I'm going to mention it here, is the corporations being able to buy politicians to change laws that either benefit them or restrict the growth of their competitors. This is a huge ihe. If we eliminated corporations from being able to fund elections, we would see the whole regulatory framework change, because there wouldn't be this abuse anymore of government and regulation to get what we want, to play this game, to use the government as a form of controlling our competition. It's effectively what it is. It's why the big corporations end up seeming to just skip by while, you know, competition becomes harder and harder to make profitable. Like, you know, competition, like Rumble was a great example. Rumble just wasn't able to compete in through a natural growth curve because Google was restricting its access in search results. So they weren't able to increase their exposure anywhere, even though they were covering topics that should have been indexed in search results. And why do they get away with that? Well, I think in part because Google is massively involved in the government. But we recently saw a court order that said Google couldn't do that and that it was antitrust. And now the FEC is looking at it. But will the FEC actually do the right thing? Probably not. Not the FEC, sorry, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission. So there's, you end corporate involvement in elections. Regulation starts to seem more sane and fair. There's less rigging. Politicians don't have a lot to gain financially by creating a fair playing field.
Yeah. What about inflation? What's your take on managing that?
Again, this is going to be a really hard one. And this next administration is going to have to reduce this runaway inflation. They cannot continue to use the current interest rates to boost up the economy. Our stock market cannot be the reason for avoiding good monetary policy. We absolutely have to figure out how to reduce government spending. Government spending and inflation are directly tied. And secondarily, we have to figure out how to increase supply and productivity in this country. Again, the actual correction that we need to do is going to be a hard one.
What is the actual correction, though?
There's a few paths to it. So Israel in the 80s changed monetary policy that actually increased inflation for a fixed period of time, which allowed them to manage their debt because they had runaway debt and they had to get their debt under control. So inflation and debt go hand in hand. When you correct for your debt, you can reduce inflation at some future period. But you oftentimes will have to go through certain adjustments. And there's a number of these adjustments that can be made. Reducing spending is a really important one. There's been talks of changing how we issue entitlements, which is a really touchy subject, but none of these are comfortable, right? Your reaction to moving to the gold standard was shock, right? It's super uncomfortable.
Yeah, just because I don't think people will go for it. That's the thing. Like having money backed by gold, I love it. I don't love it as much as having it backed by something that's truly impossible to inflate. So if gold were a static commodity instead of one that inflates at roughly 2% a year, I would like it a lot. This is where I think anybody following along needs to understand inflation and why it matters. So this was the thing that really blew my mind. Inflation is, if you don't like the words I'm about to use, by all means, you'll get a chance to say your words. My words are that inflation is theft. It is it's moral degeneracy. And I think that the government of any nation owns its people a means by which to store their value that cannot be inflated. Now, the way that inflation happens is you print money. And I'm going to keep it that simple. Yes, for the econ heads out there, I know it's far more complicated than this, but this is close enough. Government prints money, and that causes inflation. And by printing money, what they do is they spread losses across anybody that owns US dollars or treasuries or bonds and debt. And so, hey, China gets to participate in our invisible tax. And it hits their buying power just like it hits anybody else's. So you may still have $100 in your bank account, but now it only buys $90 worth of stuff, maybe 80, maybe 70, maybe 60. And so those losses are socialized across everybody that holds US dollars or US debt. And that's how they fund wars. That's how they deficit spend. That's how they
Ron
make
Paul
payments.
calls it counterfeit money.
Yeah, it is literally counterfeit money. It's just that we sanction the government to create it.
Yeah, we can't do that anymore.
Oh, but we can and we will. And so I see us driving off of a cliff. This going back to your point about why I made the face when you said that going back on the gold standard, right now you have a fiat money supply that you can inflate infinitely, which means that the government can literally steal, my words, as much money from the people and other debt holders as they want to. And they can trick everybody into thinking that they're getting something for it. And so in what universe would they be like, yeah, let's go back to the gold standard? It happened once back in whatever, 1930. But it certainly has not happened again, because it was supposed to. 1971, we go off the gold standard, supposed to go right back. It's been a minute. Still no gold standard.
Been decades. The other option is Bitcoin. And the challenge that I'm seeing people in, like Elizabeth Warren, is poster child for regulating Bitcoin. And
control, you said it up top.
Yeah, it's about control. So the federal government would have to let go of some of its control over that it has enjoyed for decades now over fiat currency. This is why we need to re-elect a new generation of leaders that have faith in private markets to self-correct, and who can also stop subsidizing the things that prevent private markets from succeeding. We do not have that kind of leadership. It's interesting that the exact same kind of people that like to control narratives, that like to control the media, that like to control censorship, are also the ones that are obsessed with controlling our fiat currency. Same group of people, same mentality. This is why it is a fundamental shift away from that model, because that model, as you so wisely pointed out, is running us off a cliff, us being the remainder of those very few corporatist elites that have hacked the system for themselves.
Okay, so I'll give you my overly simplistic take on one thing that would help. So we both agree that you have to get spending, like balance the budget, plain and simple.
Immediately.
That's a level of panic and suffering and pain, though, that I don't think people are going to go for. But just know that I
actually don't think it has to be that painful.
You need to say more, my friend. Say so many more words.
Okay.
How is that possible? How do we balance a budget that adds $1 trillion in debt every 100 days?
Yeah.
What do we stop paying for that gets us to, I mean, that's almost $3 trillion a year. That's crazy. In fact, it is $3 trillion a year. That's insane. How do we balance the budget without revolt?
From where this Biden administration was and how they thought about money, very, very different. It's almost generational. Boomers, and even Gen X have had the benefit of living these really gilded existences. You know, it's very different than millennials. I don't know how old you are.
I'm a Gen Xer.
You're a Gen Xer. Okay. So you graduated from college, and you know, you and your peers looked around. There weren't too many wars going on. There were jobs. There was job security. You believed in Social Security generally, right? Your generation generally believed Social Security. You pay into the system. It will be there for you as an entitlement one day when you retire. Millennials, very, very different mindset. We graduated to 9/11, the Iraq War, Afghanistan. That was high school. Then we graduated from college into the great financial crisis. That whole boomerang effect, that didn't exist for your generation. You're welcome. Millennials gave you the boomerang effect, not because we wanted it, but because there were no jobs or promises or systems for us to pay into in 2008 and 2009. The standard path of going into work was significantly limited. I don't know many millennials that think about Social Security in the way that boomers and Gen Xers do. It's just different mentality. We've had to treat money differently. And we had to get very, very creative. We had to invent all of these new different ways of looking at money and saving it. And, you know, Robinhood came from millennials, and looking at the stock market differently, and thinking about how we were going to spend our money in you know, these group, you know, communities, right? All of a sudden communes came back in style for, you know, because millennials needed roommates. So Airbnb is a great example of that too. So there's all of these interesting creative things that millennials have created out of need, and to serve the realities of the economy. You put millennials into the federal government, and it's going to be different as long as we don't get influenced by the way the boomers are running the federal budget. Just here's an example. Our campaign has been very loud about PFAS and contamination in water. The Biden administration got hold of this and they said, wow, look at all these people who all of a sudden know that their water supply is poisoning them and they're really pissed off. We better do something about it. They have the EPA then announce that they're going to put $1 billion into taking PFAS out of water. Dead silence after that. Where's that $1 billion going? Is the Government Accountability Office actually paying attention to that? Is there any organization that's keeping track of every single dollar that the government's spending? Previously, it'd be very expensive to set up these organizations to track government accountability, but now we have technology, and this is where I am an AI optimist. We can use technology now to really set bench posts for the spending that the government is doing. Some of it's important, but if it's going to groups and organizations that are not actually meeting their milestones, there needs to be accountability. None of that exists today. There's almost zero government accountability. And, you know, maybe boomers and Gen X could get away with that. Millennials, we typically haven't been able to get away with lack of accountability. We either produce or we get fired. And that's why millennials tend to jump from job to job to job, because it's very clear when it's not working out. Oftentimes, you know, you can't just scoot by and hang out in middle management as a millennial. And I think that that culture is why you see J.D. Vance running alongside Trump and not a Gen Xer. And I don't want to make this like a generational argument, but there are some cultural differences. It's why I think, you know, Bobby like picked me out of the bunch to run with him. It's because, you know, I keep track of every penny. I take it very seriously. I think there's a moral commitment you make when you both give money and take money. And I'm very strict about that. Immigrants tend to be really strict about that too. And I'm a child of an immigrant. Like, we don't live on the principles of Keynesian economics and borrowing and credit. We're very much living our lives to the principles of Austrian economics. It's either there and it's real, or it's not, and you got to go out and work. So, you know, I think, again, government is more than just a bunch of people with policies. What government actually is it's a transactional body. That's all it is. Its policies tell us like how we spend that money, but the reality is it is a transactional vehicle. And one of the best things to increase productivity, accountability, and transparency of transactions is technology.
You know that amazing feeling of sleeping in your own bed after a long trip? Well, my wife Lisa and I spent the past 2 weeks staying in 5-star hotels, and it was amazing, but none of their beds came close to what we have here at home thanks to our 8 Sleep Pod 4 Ultra. I missed our bed almost as much as I miss Lisa when I'm traveling without her. Now, here's why it's so amazing. It cools each side of the bed independently, thankfully, up to 20 degrees below room temperature. It detects snoring and gently lifts your head to stop it, and it tracks your sleep with 99% accuracy. No wearables are needed. There's a reason athletes, CEOs, and high performers swear by 8 Sleep. If you want to level up your sleep routine, head to 8sleep.com/impact and use code IMPACT to get $350 off your Pod 4 Ultra. They currently ship to the US, Canada, the UK, Europe, and Australia.
Every dollar counts when you're running a business, and that's why it is so important to cut costs wherever you can without impacting performance. NetSuite by Oracle is one very smart way to do that. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one platform and one source of truth.
It reduces IT costs and cuts the cost of maintaining multiple systems. Plus, you can improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform. Over 37,000 companies are using NetSuite right now. And by popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Click the link in the show notes or head to netsuite.com/theory right now. That's netsuite.com/theory. Again, it's netsuite.com/theory.
Okay, then I want to know how you plan to use technology to overcome what I think is going to be the big problem. So everything you just said, I love it. It sounds great. If I'm millennial or Gen Z, that's going to be music to my ears. Yes, those guys had a gilded existence. We've had it tougher, but that means that we know how to like spend a dollar and how to save. But the problem is that right now you're in inverted pyramid territory where you have a lot more old people than you have young people to take care of them. And so you can't just say, sorry, boomers, we're not going to fund the liabilities that you've paid into your whole life and you're owed. So now it's the only thing I see as being an option is you either have to completely overhaul the benefits, which I just cannot fathom.
We can't for boomers.
Right?
We can't.
So then it becomes you're going to have to money print to cover those costs. And now you're back where we started, which is you're not going to be able to balance the budget because one of your biggest line items is just it's non-negotiable.
Well, the line is that boomers are going to be paying for their care no matter what. They're going to be paying for it because inflation, right? Their dollar just isn't worth as much. So the dollar that they're getting in entitlements is just not purchased. It does not have the same purchasing power. So there's some recognition about that. And then there is the, where do the other cuts come from? And it is true that we need some bit of easing to get out of the situation. I would love to see a voluntary system in play where, there's some balance between, and again, remember, boomers have a huge amount of wealth. Of any retired generation, they're the wealthiest and they're still getting the benefits. So there's excess wealth there, and we need to figure out how to turn that excess wealth into stimulus. And we're either going to do that by either changing like the inheritance tax a little bit and making sure that if it is, that inheritance tax can be toyed with in a way that goes directly into economic stimulus versus to the government. Because, the minute you transact to the government, there's transaction costs, there's bureaucratic costs, there's an unknown of like if the government is going to even spend that wisely, if they're going to send it overseas.
Would you feel good about that if we didn't have a balanced budget?
Would I feel good about cutting inheritance tax?
Not cutting. You didn't say cutting. I thought you were saying specifically the opposite, which is that you would increase inheritance tax in some way and make sure that money was then put into the economy.
No, I think it would be a voluntary system related to inheritance taxes that would be earmarked towards some kind of stimulus package.
Voluntary how?
Well, you can either pay it to the government or say you want to pay it to your child's first home, right? That would be a voluntary agreement.
So the change there would be that you have the option to put it towards the home versus paying it to the government.
And there are all kinds of really, really interesting schemes.
So you're letting them control their money as long as it's going into something that you consider stimulatory.
Yes.
Very interesting. Okay.
And we've seen schemes like this with homes, first homes, second homes. There's like all of these different ways to move money around that are tax efficient. And so we have the ability to be creative around it. Boomers are very wealthy. They're going to be leaving around a huge amount of wealth. And it is on us thinking through the long-term economics of where that money goes. I don't think it should just go into the coffers of the government because the government has failed to put dollars into actual stimulus. The transaction cost of getting it into even stimulus bills is in and of itself extraordinary.
Do you want to see the government shrink at all?
Yes. Yes. I think we all do. I mean,
I don't think we all do.
Who doesn't?
You and I do.
Yeah.
I don't know if either the Trump or Biden camps want to shrink the government. They, for sure, Harris, I said Biden, didn't I? The Harris camp, I don't think does at all. In fact, I have a feeling that they want
Well, her
more and
policies
more.
require big government
Correct.
to bail out and feed people.
And I'll be interested to see with Trump because he printed the life out of money when he was in office. So he
literally,
yeah,
like it lost substance.
he says words that are better around that
Yeah.
in terms of wanting to upend certain departments, but I don't know, that yet to be seen.
Yeah.
But okay, that's very interesting that you want smaller government.
Well, I want efficiency. And if you look at the role of the government today, it's not meeting its basic criteria in my definition. We don't have clean food, water, utility. Public goods is a freaking mess. Like, that's the basic function of government, and they are failing at it. Where they're spending their money, these are auxiliary functions. These are not real functions of government. They are overreach. They are part of either these large money laundering schemes, corporate capture schemes, schemes for power in politics. They're not actually functioning. So first and foremost, we have to make sure that the dollars we are spending are addressing these critical functions of government like public goods.
We've talked about what we see wrong with the Harris approach to economics. What do you see as the problem with Trump's approach?
You know, Trump's Achilles heel in his first term was really Big Pharma. And I don't think he understood that it would cripple his entire reputation and legacy as much as it did. And it was this perfect storm of him kind of being like, oh, I'll take the Pfizer $1 million for my inauguration event, to selling out to Fauci and Operation Warp Speed and the lockdowns. Who knew? Who knew just taking $1 million from Pfizer would open the door to one of the most catastrophic decisions the United States and a United States president has ever made in history?
Fauci or Warp Speed?
I mean, they're all part of the same package, but capitulating to Fauci's vision for the government under Project Warp Speed and with the lockdowns, the masking, the supply chain disruptions. Then there was the stimulus package, the $8 trillion in the stimulus package, which was really for PPP and PPE and all of the all of those. There was it was such a massive spend for something that in retrospect was not necessary at all, and started us on this trajectory.
What do you, I haven't heard a lot about Trump's policy yet, economic policy, if he were to get elected this time. Have you? Is anything changed? Is he making new sounds? What's his approach?
What we're hearing from the Trump camp is very positive. We are hearing that he wants to distance himself from Big Pharma. We are hearing full acknowledgement that, he now in retrospect should not have fallen prey to the pressures in Washington to capitulate to the lockdowns and then the needed bailouts. His record was reasonable prior to those massive mistakes in 2020. And I don't see acknowledgement. I mean, he's not doing it publicly, but privately, I don't see much acknowledgement from any political leadership that has contributed to the problem, like I've seen from Donald Trump. And I see him wanting to do things like he wants to create a container. He definitely wants to bring in an administration that, I see him working with Tulsi, very exciting sign that he wants to de-escalate the wars, de-escalate and withdraw from the enormous amount of military spending. I mean, that is the lowest hanging fruit, and he is ready to go on it.
What do you think about his pick of J.D. Vance?
I like J.D. Vance. I think his statement on cat ladies was misguided. But other than that, I think he wrote a great book, Hillbilly Elegy, which really connects to a much forgotten population and a much left behind but important and wise and soulful population of the United States that, you know, I think is the greatest potential for revival. And I think there's, you know, when I look at small businesses and small business economy, I think about farming. I think about rural America. I think this is the largest untapped opportunity we have right now. And I think JD Vance is grown from that, and he gets it. And I love what he's done with his career. I think that he, you know, has done some interesting, I don't love his pharma stuff. I don't love some of the stuff he's invested in. I'd like to see him explain some of it. I mean, I've not had the perfect investment record either. But I think those are things that as long as he shows growth from, I think he is going to have great potential leading this country.
When you look at some of the pundits on him, one of the things that you'll see is a potential nefarious line drawn to Peter Thiel, that there's, if they see him as the future of the party, what does that mean in terms of corporate, governmental, interconnectedness? And do you think that there's anything to that, or are these just rumors?
Look, Silicon Valley, Peter Thiel, and the PayPal mafia, they're very well known, and they're reasonably predictable. It's these are individuals that made a huge amount of success thinking through how to use the internet for optimizing financial transactions with PayPal. PayPal was a massive success. They went on to invest in a whole number of things. A lot of them really are liberty-oriented, school choice-oriented. They mirror many of the things you hear from liberty Republicans, which is a population I tend to like a lot. They believe in free speech. You know, some of their more transhumanist things are I don't fully align with. And, you know, they're very close to Palantir, which is a massive government contractor. So that's something to keep an eye on. But overall, in terms of totalitarian, like nefarious agenda, I don't see that. It doesn't terrify me as much coming from that group. I'd love to see them talk more transparently about what, you know, their overall agenda is and hopes and goals for the American family. I think that would alleviate a lot of the concern. But I find that this group of people is smaller, you know, those around Peter Thiel. They believe in individual liberties. They believe in sovereignty. I don't see them doing as many of these intelligence agency partnerships as maybe some of the other Silicon Valley groups that I'm not going to name. But I will say that if we are splitting hairs, I would much rather, I mean, obviously I'd much rather see Bobby and I in the White House. I think we do a much better, cleaner, transparent, less corrupt job around all of these things. But if we're splitting hairs, I would say that I trust the future of this country more under the leadership of the Trump and the Thiels and the JD Vances than I do right now of the Harrises and Reid Hoffmans.
Very interesting. All right, then what do you think about Walz as VP?
I love his jazz hands. I will say they're really good at branding over there. Walz is somebody I think was a relatively safe choice, but, you know, he only sells in an environment in which stolen valor is not like a big deal, right? He has lied about his military background. And if you are a veteran, you look at Walz and you're appalled that this is not a patriot. This is somebody who has lied, who was terrified of being deployed, who was kind of sneaky and tried to use his military service as a political talking point. And his peers in the military have only negative things to say. So that matters a lot to people who care about these things. Unfortunately, there's a massive population here in the United States that thinks about stolen valor as no biggie. And so my concern is more about that there's so many that aren't taking this seriously than I do about the man himself. But obviously, if the man himself then becomes elected by this population, I think we're in trouble. This is not like the values, the moral compass that is being just accepted as normal by this segment of the population is scary to me.
I hear that. All right. There were rumors going around that RFK was in talks with Trump, that he was in talks with the Harris camp for a potential endorsement to either of them if they could give him, I presume, a spot in one of their cabinets. Is there any truth to it? Would love to hear about that.
Definitely not in talks with Harris. Definitely never have brought up this idea of an endorsement with Harris. Definitely have never brought up a cabinet position with Harris. So those are the MSN just taking something and spinning it in a way that makes, their chosen political group look good. Fake news. With, that being said, we have offered to talk to everybody about what your policies are, who's going to be in your cabinet. Do you want to hear any of our takes on policy and what might work? We've open sourced our platform very proudly. And I will say that Trump has taken genuine, sincere interest in our policies around chronic disease. He takes it seriously. For that reason, I think it behooves us to sit and see if we can actually make some real change. And if that is a unity party, I think that it is something that we absolutely owe to the American public to explore.
What would a unity party look like?
I think it would be on day one making sure that our health, the arm of the government responsible for health, HHS, is directed by someone we can trust, someone without ties to Big Pharma, someone who understands the foundations of and preconditions of healthy life, somebody who is not going to sell out our children to profiteering.
Okay. When would you guys make that decision? There's obviously huge concerns that you guys are a spoiler candidate. And so I understand there'll be a public-facing message, but I'm very curious how you guys think about that.
We did not start this campaign. I did not put in tens of millions of dollars to be a spoiler candidate. I put in tens of millions of dollars to win, to fix this country, to do the right thing. I will say that Clear Choice, this PAC, this DNC aligned PAC that was created specifically to take us out, has spent millions of dollars to take us out. They have unfortunately turned us into a spoiler. And we don't want to be a spoiler. We wanted to win. We wanted a fair shot. The DNC made that impossible for us. They have banned us, shadow banned us, kept us off stages, manipulated polls, used lawfare against us, sued us in every possible state. They've even planted insiders into our campaign to disrupt it and to create actual legal issues for us. I mean, the extent by which the sabotage they've unleashed upon us, it's mind-blowing. I mean, we're still learning new ways that they have sabotaged us. I really wanted a fair shot at this election. And I believed in the America that a little girl pledged an allegiance to. And that is not where we are today. And it's not because of the Republican Party taking us out. It is exclusively because of the Democratic Party taking us out. And I am so disappointed I ever helped them. I am so disappointed that I helped Chuck Schumer in that Georgia runoff secure a majority. It's probably one of the biggest mistakes of my life. And it's really devastating. So to answer your question, we are not spoilers. That was never our motivation. We really wanted a fair shot. I think had we had a fair shot, we would have won. I still would love to see in the last 80 days of this election some miracle play out where we get a chance to debate. I don't think they're going to let us. And, given this, I think we are taking a very serious look at making sure that the people that have corrupted our fair and free democracy do not end up in office in November. It's hard. I mean, it's really hard, Tom, to say these words because it's also acknowledging how bad things are.
Yeah, it's hard to hear the words. Do you guys see any path to victory at this point?
I mean, technically, if we can stay on the ballots, we've qualified for all the ballots now, which is like an enormous feat. Like you don't understand. The system was designed after Ross Perot to keep this from ever happening again. And we accomplished it. So technically we could win. We could absolutely win still. The problem is if you censor a candidate as we've been censored, people don't get a chance to even hear us. There are things that could happen that would still allow us to win in November, even in this environment. And it could, you can't predict the number of variables. But as long as we remain on the ballots, we could win. The question is the risk of a Harris Walts presidency worth us staying in? And that's the question we have to ask ourselves right now is, do we trust Trump and in his personal sincerity to really do the right thing for our country and chronic disease, balance the budget, end these forever wars? Is he somebody that's going to continue to invite people like Bobby and I into the conversation? Or is he going to fall victim again to the things he fell victim to in his first administration? So we're weighting it all. It's not an easy calculation. We want what's best for this country first and foremost. And it is, it's an interesting place to be. I won't lie. Like you can't make this stuff up.
As somebody who understands that we're connected to something bigger, that spirituality and politics are intertwined, what does your gut tell you about how this is going to play out?
This election is so important, but so is the 2026 governor race in California. And my gut tells me that sometimes you need to go to the source of where all of this stuff is coming from. It's coming from right here in California. It's coming from the influence Silicon Valley and Hollywood has had on the Democratic Party. It comes from this idea that you can manipulate people with lies to get their votes. It comes from this lack of accountability that just seems to continue to spiral. And I think that what my gut tells me right now is that we just have to keep being honest I got to just keep being honest. I got to keep focusing on what matters the most outside of party lines. I need to focus on a vision that goes beyond November. And if that means that we stay in, and, you know, there's benefits to staying in. If we get over 5% of the vote, we actually establish ourselves as a party. 71% of Americans want a strong third party with a real shot at winning. There's even public funds available if we get over 5% of the vote. So we could get, I think it's like $13.5 million in public funds to keep the party going. And that's, you know, that's worth something. That means that we can position for a real third party election in 2028 where we don't have to go around and spend tens of millions of dollars on ballot access, which means that we can spend all of that time and money campaigning. So, you know, there's two options that we're looking at, and one is staying in, forming that new party, but we run the risk of a Kamala Harris and Walts presidency because we draw votes from Trump, or we draw somehow more votes from Trump, or we walk away right now and join forces with Donald Trump, and you know, we walk away from that and we explain to our base why we're making this decision. Not easy.
Clearly.
Yeah, not an easy decision.
Now, are you saying that if you did end up deciding to back out, that you would run for governor, or you would back somebody for governor?
Oh, you caught onto that piece, huh? I don't know yet. I think that I'd be happy to support somebody great to run for California governor so that we can nip this dynastic lineage in the butt. I would consider running as well. I want to be involved in California. I think, you know, we're the 6th largest economy in the world. We have every opportunity to get this right. We produce a third of the produce for the rest of the nation. So all of the policies I care most about really do apply to California directly. Innovation, AI, farming, clean water, water systems, efficiency of government, efficiency of cities, clear border policies. Well, closed border. It's not that, this is not rocket science. You just got to close and manage the border.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't that be simple and nice and straightforward for all of us? And then, you know, you think about immigration policy differently too, and there's ways to do that at the state level. So I think that we could model California brilliantly as the shining example of how to bail out of the catastrophic state the nation is in right now. We just model California for the rest of the federal government.
All right. If you guys did end up teaming up with Trump for a unity party, what role would you play? What role would RFK play?
I am not in talks with Trump. I just want to make that clear. So it would be, you know, I could envision a situation in which Bobby goes and he does an incredible job with, you know, for example, HHS. And Human Health Services. It oversees a massive portfolio of budgets, over $1 trillion budget. It really has far reach. So I think that Bobby in a role like that would be excellent. I fully support it. I have high hopes. And, you know, just in my personal life, I'd love to see the state of science go uncensored and uncorrupted. I don't want my child to be subject to this anymore.
And this being the censorship, dehumanization.
Yeah, and the misstating of what's actually happening. Like there's all of these great researchers who want to do the science, but they can't. There's all of these clinicians that want to speak the truth, but they can't. They actually can't. They will lose their licenses if they speak outside of the central scientific paradigm.
And how do we stop that?
It's so simple. Government stops colluding with Big Pharma. It's really simple. And it doesn't cost any money. That's the best part. It's both good for the economy, saves money, and allows people to access the information they need to live healthy lives.
We've covered a lot of ground. What message would you want to leave to the American people, whether you are staying in the race or going out? I imagine there is a simple idea you want people to hold on to. What is it?
Go independent. Join the 51% of Americans that have released themselves, freed themselves from the gridlock of this two-party thinking. You will find yourself happier. You will find yourself more honest with just your needs and your wants and the things you're seeing. You invite back critical thinking. And guess what? You're going to make a lot more friends. It's just a happier state to be in. And you can vote for whoever you want. And you can believe what you are experiencing through your own lived experience. So invite back critical thinking. Go independent.
I love it. Where can people follow you and see what you end up deciding?
Follow us on X. Thank goodness for X. It's allowed us to at least to speak freely with the people that have found us. And follow our podcast. Bobby has a great podcast. I've got one called Back to the People, where, long form discussions like these are so important. And allow yourself to listen to everyone, no matter what their political, anyone who interests you, right, on the topics. Listen to both sides.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Everybody, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace. If you like this conversation, check out this episode to learn more.
The best basis for determining whether a certain argument is true is to watch it challenged and defended. Inflation is theft. It is a tax on the poor. It's a tax on the working class. Trump and Biden did. They created a